Welcome to the very second episode of the Bonus XP podcast. I'm your host, Luke Morgan. Joining me today is Griner.
Hello.
And Conan.
Howdy.
So we figured today we would do a special limited edition episode of the Bonus XP podcast, seeing as we are now 1 year removed from the release date of The Last of Us Part 2. Arguably the greatest piece of media in history.
Wow.
There are some people who don't think that.
There's one person that would argue that, I think, and that's about it.
Oh, okay. So Last of Us Part 2 obviously came out last year, June 19th, 2020. It currently has a Metacritic score of 93. It did have a much lesser score on the user ratings, but we'll get into why that was and everything about this game. So this is we've been wanting to do this for a while. Before this podcast was even a thing, we sort of all wanted, especially Conan and myself, a big Last of Us fans, good friends of T Bakes, which is Troy Baker for the people who aren't friends with him. We've been wanting to do this for a long time, just sit down, talk, and do a video on our thoughts on The Last of Us. Griner borrowed my PS4 a few months ago because he was so keen to play The Last of Us Part 2 because he'd missed out. Obviously, being a PC guy, he doesn't get these good quality exclusive games. So
the truth behind that story was Luke's like, come over to my house for a minute. I go over there and he basically throws the PS4 into my arms and I had to catch it before it fell to the ground. But I did appreciate it.
Yes. I think you played God of War first.
I played it second, but enjoyed it more.
Oh, okay. So, first, we might as well go around the table and get everyone's... Conan, I'll start with you. What's your relationship to The Last of Us, both like as a series and in general? Give us your history on it.
All right, so I've got not a lurid history, but I'm going to say lurid history because it sounds cool. I didn't have a PS3, didn't care for the PS3 when it came out, but then Luke, you were the big fanboy, and I can't remember if it was 2013, 2014, or at some point, basically
2013.
2013. All right. I went over to your house and you convinced me, as you do, you throw PlayStations at Griner and you sit me down in your room and say, play this game. And so I did. And so for about 9 or 10 hours straight, I played The Last of Us in one sitting. And it was both a magical and a disillusioning experience. But I really enjoyed it. For the longest time, we had a running debate about which game was better, this or BioShock Infinite. As I've gotten older and wiser, I've definitely come to realize that I was wrong in that side, and The Last of Us is a superior game. I don't know.
Just quickly, was that after we got our good friend T Bake's opinion on it?
Look, meeting him definitely
met up with him at that bar that time and got his opinion.
Definitely played a part of it. He was just giving his insights and opening his soul to us.
Yep.
I think it's a game I've replayed a lot. It ticks all the boxes. It's really fun. It's a zombie apocalypse thing. I love dystopian apocalypse stuff. Joel is a grizzled man. I like to think I'm a grizzled man, and so I can resonate. But I think it was a really valuable game as well for the medium because it was a real conversation point for a long time where it represented this perceived step forward in the medium. Where it was like, hey, games aren't just things kids do anymore. Look at this. This is quote unquote, this is grown up material. Now, I think there's a lot of wrong interpretation there of what a grown up game is. And, sort of, you could unpack that. But I think it was really important because this came out and said, hey, look, games and game narrative isn't just a plumber fighting a turtle. It is stories that have real drama and real character and all the things we expect from sort of cinema. They can do it in games. So it was really valuable and it was just really good.
Yep. And where does it rank now in your list of games? Do you still regard it as highly as you did back then?
Yeah, the first one. I think we did an unreleased episode of our top 10 games of the decade, and
it was very spicy. It was very spicy.
Spicy as milk. It came in as number 2, which I think is probably I agree with that rating. I think it's probably the second best game of the decade. It's incredibly, it still remains. I still play it probably every year.
True.
Like the music is like everything about it works. The performance is great. The music's great. I listen to that soundtrack a lot. I think of quotes from it. Yeah, it's a very important game, I think, to me.
Yep. And Griner, kind of similar to our story about Last of Us 2, what was your experience with the Last of Us series and back to Last of Us 1?
So yeah, Last of Us 1. Again, you loaned me a PlayStation so I could play it. Appreciate it. Last of Us 1, yeah, it's a great game. Like, number 2 game of the decade, 100% agree. It's as Conan said, like, there has been over the years this debate about, are video games art? And I think it's a silly debate, and I think there are games that came before it that, particularly indie games that had more of an artistic bent to them. But this is one of the
Yeah.
first games that felt like cinematic art, like in the way that movies and really good films are art. This felt like that. Like, it combined excellent acting with visuals, with a story. And I mean, to me, the biggest thing about the first one was the world building. Like, that's what it did really, really well. It created all these little details that really put together to create this fascinating world. And then they told this really good story, solid story. It's not like a super complex story. There's not a heap of twists and
No.
turns. There's not a whole bunch of dramatic reveals or anything like that. But it's a good, solid story that has a nice sort of twist at the end. And yeah, the gameplay was really good too. Like, the gameplay was very solid. And yeah, one of the best games of the last 10 years easily.
Yeah. So I won't go on too much about my experience with The Last of Us. I do regard it as one of my favorite games of all time. It blew me away. I was very hyped on it. I was a big Uncharted fan, so I put Naughty Dog on a pedestal leading up to The Last of Us. And like every now and again, I'll see like a memory on my Facebook where statuses where I'm like, 1 week until my favorite game of all time comes out. Like before I'd even played it, I just was like, I'm certain of it. And then like 2 days after The Last of Us came out, I was like, I was correct. It is my favorite game of all time. And like my daughter's name is Ellie, like, and that's from The Last of Us. It had such an impact on me. When I first played, obviously, I wasn't a father at the time. I was still a young bachelor, living it up in my parents' house playing video games. But and that's the thing, like, it is a game that I played it once. I watched Conan play it all the way through. Like, that whole time he played it, he says 9 hours. It was 15 hours or so.
Damn.
And I just sat on the floor watching it the whole time, just like in awe again, because it had been about 5 months since I'd played it since its original release. And honestly, even till now, I think I've played it 3 times maybe in total. Like, when it was remastered on PS4, I played it again, and then leading up to Last of Us 2, I played it again. It is my favorite game, but it's a game that I feel like I can't play that much, if you know what I mean. Like, it's something that moment was perfect when I played it, similar to Journey on PS3. Like, I played that once through, and that was my experience with it. I feel like I would devalue it in a way if I played it again, because the thing that stands out to me the most about it, like you guys have said about how it felt like a cinematic story, and I think that is the story side of it. Like, the acting, the writing, everything like that is what really stands out to me for that game. And so, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't have the same impact if I would play it multiple times, but
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of games that I think they're like lightning in a bottle experiences. You play them once and it hits you at a right time in your life, and it ticks all these boxes that you might not have even known you had. And it's like, that was perfect.
yeah,
And if you ever come back to them, like you say, you never appreciate as much because you're like, I had a perfect experience. I can't have another perfect experience.
yeah, that lightning in a bottle sort of thing. So I'll get the question out there just to start it. Is this better than the first game?
Is The Last of Us 2 better than the first game?
Yeah, is The Last of Us 2 better than The Last of Us 1? I'll start with you, Grona.
Absolutely not. Like, it's not even close. My opinion.
Why is that? Like, what's making it not close at all? Because obviously, gameplay-wise, you can't argue that it's
So for me, gameplay-wise, like, I probably couldn't write down for you 10 differences between the gameplay in the first one and the second one. Like, I haven't played the first one recently. Like, I'll 100% admit that. But picking this game up, I felt like, this is exactly what I was doing in The Last of Us 1. Same types of enemies, almost identical in terms of the stealth gameplay. So sure, was it more polished? Absolutely. And it is, like, it's an excellent game. I'm not saying it's a bad game, but I just think it's very hard to do a sequel better than the first game, than the first one of the series. And it's even harder when it's a cinematic experience or a story experience like this. Like, if this was just purely a game that we all loved because the gameplay was so awesome, and then the second game just polished that gameplay, the second game would probably be a better game. But to me, this game played much the same as the first game, and I don't think the story quite cuts it. At least not compared to the first game. Like, the first game, to me, like, it set up this world, did this really simple story. The second game, I mean, doesn't really add much to the world. Seattle may as well just be Boston. Like, they're the same locations in my mind. And I don't know. I think the story is not perfect in the second game.
So would you say, like, it was the debate many years before 2 came out, but was this needed? Or should it have remained that one standalone game?
Oh, I was fine. Like, I was fine with the idea of a sequel, sure. I just, yeah. Like, I mean, I don't know. In retrospect, like, there's lots of ideas floating around what better sequels could have been than The Last of Us 1, and I think a lot of them are better ideas. Maybe we'll get to some of them later, but
we'll get into that. Conan, what do you think?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not better than the first one. The first one is a better game. Now, I think Griner's point is pretty accurate about it being cinematic. It's this game relies heavily on its cinematic nature, and that can be both a gift and a curse. And I think that's why, Luke, you were able to sit and watch me play it for 15 hours, because it's like watching a TV show. If you watch me play, like, I don't know, a more gamey game, like just Battlefield for 15 hours, you know, you'd get very sick of that very quickly, because it's like, what's the point?
Down for that? No.
Yeah, I think is the game needed? I don't want to say no, because I really enjoyed playing number 2. Like, as soon as I finished it, I replayed it through straight after. And I was like, that was still great. But I think, especially in terms of the story, the first game really does end on a point. It ends on a question that shouldn't be answered. Like, there's a great analysis of it on YouTube by this channel, Writing on Games, and he talks about that, how the whole power of that relies in that unanswered question. And it's like, you can think that Joel's right, you can think he's wrong, you can think Ellie believes him, you can think she doesn't. But by specifically answering the question in number 2, it does devalue something about the first one in a lot of ways. And I don't think it we'll talk a lot more about it when we talk about what sequels do, but I don't think it's better than the first.
It's like making a sequel to Inception and saying, well, the canonical answer is that he's still in a dream. Sorry, everyone. Like, it really ruins that question that it ends on.
Yeah.
And I get that. So my personal opinion, and I've got to do some thinking on it. Like, it's a difficult question for me,
because this is your favorite game, isn't it?
I think Last of Us 2 is my favorite game.
You can't go back on it now. You've said it many times.
Yeah.
Like, it's either this or The Last of Us 1. Like, it's 100% between those two. There's no competition. How close they are can differ. The only thing is, I haven't gone back to play Last of Us 1 since I finished number 2. So it'd be interesting to go back and play that and experience that story now and experience that ending and see where I stand on that and see if it was devalued by number 2 or whatever. I did have this thought, like, after The Last of Us 1, I always looked at it as like this perfect standalone game. And it's something that is quite ballsy in the game industry, where it didn't need a sequel. And for a fair while, they were like, shut down any sequel talk. They were like, no, we've told the story we wanted. Maybe we'll go back there if there's a story worth telling one day. And I loved that ambiguity of the ending. Like, that's an amazing ending. I love that ending. It's one of my favorite video game endings of all time. And it wasn't something I craved a sequel for, like Uncharted or anything like that, where I just am ready for the next adventure. I was ready to leave Joel and Ellie to that world, sort of thing. But obviously, when Last of Us 2 was announced, I was incredibly hyped, incredibly excited. The trailers hyped me up. After probably a year or two of trailers, I started to be like, where's Joel? Like, why is Joel not in any of these trailers? And why is Neil Druckmann not talking about Joel at all in regards to this story? And started to sort of piece together what could be happening in this game. And I was very scared and worried about what would happen. And then I played it, and I adore this game so much. Like, I do believe, obviously, the gameplay is a lot more fluid, a lot, it's a lot more improved than the first one, I feel. Either if that's just a trick because the animations are so damn good, I really believe this game's animations are the top of
Best
this
in the
category.
business. Every other week, there's still a thread on Reddit saying, I found this new animation of Ellie catching a brick midair or something like that. Like, people are still finding animations for this game, and that just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Exactly. Like, during gameplay, you can watch. I watch people play this, and just in gameplay, it looks like it shouldn't be gameplay. Like, the amount of movements, the way it reacts to just little things that are happening on you, like in the environment or whatever you're doing in that, makes that gameplay feel so much more real and so much more cinematic. And I feel like that's why I value its gameplay more than the first one, which I thought also had good animations. But I remember one of Conan's complaints when he first finished it was like, I just remember him swinging the bat like over and over again, and it was just like swinging until the clickers would die sometimes.
That's how we
and he
do.
was, and I was just like, "What are you doing, stealth?" But
I'm trying to finish this in one sitting. Leave me alone.
Yeah, but it just looks so good to play, and in that way it feels so good to play. I know there's little stuff like the rope, which is just, I think, this technical marvel. I know people make a meme about it now, but it looks so good. And the thing about this is there's so much in every part of this game, like so many minute details that no one would notice. I don't know why people spent time doing it, but they did it anyway. Like, blood in this game reacts to every different sort of surface. Like, there's a blood analysis expert that did like a whole thing on Twitter where he's like, it reacts differently when it's on carpet. If you kill someone on carpet, it seeps through. If it's through wood boards, you'll actually see it fall down the gaps, like in the wooden floors. Like, it's crazy, like the amount of details in this game. And the story for me, I don't know, I've struggled with, like, I had this thing where I first played it where I was really hyped and wanted to buy the hype and everything like that, where it had pacing issues, and I think that fixes itself on a second playthrough, and we'll get into that later. I think it's pacing issues, and what I felt in my first playthrough is because of a few certain things, and we'll get into it. But I feel like it was much improved on my second playthrough. And my second playthrough is when I was like, no, this is better than Last of Us 1. While the first time I played it, I was like, it's probably behind Last of Us 1. But we'll get into that in more detail. So you can't talk about Last of Us without talking about the toxicity around the release of Last of Us Part 2, the leaks that happened before this, and basically the fan reaction to this game, bombing it on Metacritic when it first came out to like ridiculous scores. Just YouTube was just a cesspool of thumbnails with, people mocking Abby's appearance or whatever. Like, it was the new thing to hate on for months, and even now it's a sticky subject to get into in any message boards or anything like that.
I mean, I was looking at Reddit this afternoon. Even it's still just this cesspool.
Yep.
Everything is just like, here's why this game sucks, and it's like, I don't hate this guy, but Cuckman's an effort, and it's just like, wow.
Yep.
It's been a year, and everyone is still just like weirdly angry.
Touchy, yeah.
One of my favorite things to do, like when I come to like a TV show late or a game late, is to go back to the subreddit and look at like, oh, this is the things people were really excited about, but the Last of Us 2 subreddit.
No, not good.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. It actually split the Last of Us Reddit. There's a Last of Us Reddit of Last of Us 2 fans, and then there's a Last of Us Reddit, which is the old Reddit, which is just filled with toxicity about this game. It's completely split a lot of the fan base on it. So let's talk about it a bit. What caused this whole discourse around this game? Conan, you're one for toxicity.
People have called me a toxic man. I've called them.
What do you think caused this whole reaction?
So I mean, I haven't done much research into the climate of it, but from what I gather, it's still the gaming industry as a whole is still sort of reeling from Gamergate to some extent, and so you've still got this divided group, and it's indicative of, I guess, just the larger, global culture of like the world is divided, and I think in a lot of ways you can trace that back arguably to 2016 with the American election, but
Mm.
I think there's lots of other stuff as well. But world's very divided. There is two clear groups that are on either side, and they're defined by their adversity, and anything that comes up becomes their avatar or their proxy to use. And The Last of Us is just that thing. And I mean, game fans have historically been pretty entitled, unfortunately, and in a way, you can almost see why. You get really into a game, and it's like you devote half your life to it, or you just spend 300 hours, and people unfortunately give it more than it might need, and then they think, "Cool, I am part of this now. I deserve something from it." And I don't know, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but unfortunately, yeah, I think this game, which did push a lot of boundaries in terms of what the medium does and what is culturally supported or perpetuated in there, and people just reacted like review bombing isn't new.
No.
Like there's lots of things that get bumped up way higher than they need to be and dropped low because they just for whatever reason. This was a very interesting example, and unfortunately, it just because it had some issues of controversy or like contentious topics, it really just came out bad. Like it manifested really terribly.
Grana, what's your knowledge on this, the discourse around this game?
I don't know. I think Conan's right. Like, I think people are more tribal than ever. Like, everybody has their tribe that they belong to, and every other tribe sucks, no matter what. Like,
Yeah.
and we're seeing it more and more in everything. And I think this game just it was easy for one tribe to pick one side, the other tribe to pick the other side, and they went at it. And like the
Yeah.
review bombing, like yeah, it sucks and it's really stupid. But I mean, the like sending death threats to the voice actor of Abby, like that's ludicrous. Like who does
Yep.
that?
Yep.
Yeah,
And like
yeah, I can't understand. Yeah,
it's just it boggles my mind. And like you're right, gamers being entitled, I think is correct. Like even going back to Mass Effect 3, like do you remember they went back and altered the ending? Like, could you
So
imagine
I mean, I'm glad they
Could
did
you
that,
imagine
but
the writer of a book going back and editing his ending? Like, this doesn't happen in
yeah,
any other media. It's bonkers that it happens here.
I mean, it happened. I guess the other example is like the Snyder Cut, right? That's kind of
but that's
that's it happening in movies to an extent where it's like fans say they don't want this, and so eventually they answer. But
That almost feels
you're right, it happened.
the opposite in a weird
well.
like
It almost feels
this
like
is the real director's
it
vision.
feels like the gamer's attitude seeping into other media, which maybe is a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean that probably is it. Like it's no coincidence that the Snyder Cut was a superhero thing, and video games and superheroes often go hand in hand.
Yeah, and
When I'll just say when Conan mentioned that earlier about games and entitled gamers, I was going to put my hand up and admit that I was one of the people that really demanded a new ending for Mass Effect 3, and I was on those forums and like a fan of all the theories about the indoctrination theory and the end. I still think that ending was so poorly done though. Like there was
100%.
massive loopholes. It wasn't just like it was a bad ending. There was massive loopholes that didn't make any sense where your squad mates that are right next to you who you've spent 300 hours with in this journey and now suddenly on another planet, like hopping out of a spaceship, you're not sure what's going on. It's like that was a bad ending. But yeah, it caused a big thing about fans demanding
yeah,
something against the artistic
it
vision.
set an interesting precedent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean there is sort of an unspoken social contract with creators and the audience where it's like, look, I'm creating something that hopefully you like, people like, it. And it's like, okay, what I've created, I almost owe it to you in an extent, to an extent where it's like, I have your viewership because you like this, and so you can't just turn around one day and be like, I'm actually now doing the opposite of that and expect it to be the same. Like there is a sense of, hey, I create this, you like this, and that's the contract we have, that's the deal we've made. And so in a case like Mass Effect, where it really did, in a lot of ways, crap on everything the game preached, it's like Fable, where Molyneux kept being like, "This is what I'm promising you guys," and just kept never delivering, and be like, "No, guys, why don't you like me anymore?" It's like because you're betraying the very core of this.
Yeah,
And the ending of Mass Effect 3 was kind of like this. The Last of Us 2 wasn't like that, but that mentality, I think, still was really what was on show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you're right, there is a contract there, but the response should be, well, I'm just no longer going to support your things. Like I may have bought this, I may not have, I may have not bought into the hype and waited to see what people were saying about it before I bought it. But the result should be, I'm just no longer going to support your product, not
Correct.
sending death threats or
Yeah, I think
review
they
bombing.
No,
to the
you
people
should
who didn't
never
even
send
create
death
it,
threats.
especially like
Oh,
death threats to people who acted. It wasn't their decision, you idiot. Anyhow.
There's a leap in mentality there. The other thing I just want to say is like obviously like expectations were off the charts for this game, and I think like you combine that with obviously the deeper themes they look into. Obviously, LGBT. Oh man, I'm going to be in trouble.
LGBTQ.
LGBTQI characters and stuff like that are going to like in the time when this game came out, it was a hot button issue and it divided people, and that was something people could pick on. People could say, "Well, this is why I hate that game." When
Yeah,
that's just a really bad reason.
which is toxic, and that's the
Yes.
thing. But like with the culture, like political culture of our society at the moment, it is very much a civil war that's happening between ideologies or beliefs or whatever. And this game sort of came at like a bad time for that and sort of set off a bomb in the gaming world with that. I think so. Obviously, what started this, because everyone was always hyped for this game. There was this whole speculation that Naughty Dog was going, like, had sort of like a political agenda with the way they were doing like strong female characters and everything, which is silly. But it was this ongoing thing that people were worried about Last of Us 2 and that it would delve into that more and really just like go full throttle on it. And then the leaks happened. And I think the leaks, it can be the main sort of like rotten apple that set this whole thing like ablaze, because the leaks happened. People saw spoilers. Like we're going to discuss everything about this game, so spoilers.
If you haven't played this game, stop listening to this podcast.
Like people saw Abby killing Joel.
Yeah.
Like that's what the leaks were, was Joel being murdered. And at this point, people who are fans of Last of Us are a fan of Joel. Like it's it's just like that. He's one of my favorite characters of all time, if not my favorite character of all time. And to see him brutally murdered by this new character who we only had the one trailer about, which is all we got until the game came out. This new buff, like female character, and there's this narrative that got spun online that Abby was trans. And this is like, because obviously Last of Us 2 is going to have trans representation, and there was this narrative that Abby was trans, and so it just ignited this whole thing of like, well, in Last of Us 2, like a trans person brutally murders everyone's favorite straight white male gruff character. So for people who were on one side of the fence, obviously that's all the pitchforks they needed to be able to go at this game, and they went at it hard without any knowledge. I saw like there was talks 2 weeks after the game came out of people being like, well, but Abby's trans, blah blah blah. And like the fact is she's not. She's just a woman who works out and is buff and is like a strong character, and they obviously have not played the game. And so many like malicious lies that were made up about this game that then spread around YouTube, like the fact that a lot of people believed Neil Druckmann was the actor for many, and some people thought Manny was the one that has sex with Abby in that scene, and they're like, "This is sick. Neil Druckmann is the one doing this," and like that's the belief. You search that on Twitter, that was this belief that went viral. Heaps of YouTubers like all campaigned on it, like Neil Druckmann's sick and he's doing this, and it's all a joke. It's all incorrect. It's all very very wrong, and not even like anywhere near what's actually happening. But I think Joel's death and the leak of it is what was the precipice for this whole thing.
It's like that bad scene in a movie where they overhear the person talking and they only hear half the conversation, but they straight away assume, oh, they're against us, they hate us, whatever. But the problem is they don't. There's
Mighty
no. They
Ducks
don't.
all
Yeah,
over
no.
again.
Mighty Ducks comes to mind. They don't make up at the end though. In this situation, they just dig their heels in and say, "Well, I'm not going to play it," and they'll never get the true story anyway. Like they'll never get to see that Abby is a really strong, developed character. Like they'll never get to see any of that.
Yeah. It's just so strange that it was like, because obviously gaming's never really seen like a muscular woman in that extent. They've seen strong female characters, like obviously Lara Croft is a lot of people's go-to example. But like to just have a woman who wasn't strictly like overtly feminine, and everyone's like she must be trans. I'm like, how do you? Again, that's that leap of logic. Like I don't understand how your thinking goes. Just goes to there, but yeah, people did, and I think you're right. They saw Joel dead, and like this is the Last of Us getting killed, and so
Mm.
everything is a problem. Like, what problems in the world could cause this to happen? And then it's a pretty easy step to go. Oh, it must be the political agenda of Cuckman. Sorry, Druckmann. It's a Freudian slip.
So this is the thing. I'm famous for getting everything that I love spoiled for me. Like it just happens to me no matter what. I'll avoid Facebook and all this sort of stuff, and I'll go on to my Commonwealth Bank app, and there's like an ad for like the Game of Thrones for like it's just somehow I always get everything spoiled for me, and somehow I avoided this leak and I avoided the spoilers. I went on a complete media blackout for like 8 weeks. I just counted down the days and surprisingly had nothing spoiled for me. Until there was a thing 2 days before the game came out, and I read it. I didn't even realize it was a spoiler where there was a leak of not like a leak, but they revealed Last of Us polygonals finally, and I was like, oh, and clicked on the Reddit thread, not even thinking. Saw a comment and didn't even think about it. They were like, they should do one with Abby with a golf club, and I was just like, and just scroll. Had no idea what it meant, and then playing the game 4 o'clock in the morning, seeing Abby with the golf club, I was like, oh no.
I thought that story was going to be like they released Joel with his head caved in. I was like, oh, that's on the nose.
Funko aren't that messed up. But so if that's the case, then if Joel's death is really the thing, which I do believe it's the trigger for this whole backlash, if it didn't leak, would there have been this outrage? If people just played it normally and experienced it as they played it, Conan.
I think there would have still been a weird reception just because of what we mentioned. Like, you're going from the first game where you play as a traditional like narrative lead, like a strong white man, stoic loner. It's all pretty conventional, and so now you're playing as two characters, both are female, one, and neither of them are conventionally feminine. Obviously, Ellie is gay, and she's like pretty scrawny. She's not like, again, not feminine at all.
They're not sexualized characters.
No, very much.
There is that one scene.
This game, there is, and this game does a really interesting thing of like it, sort of like it's a study of the female form, or of bodies in general, I guess, but not in a sexual way. It's kind of fascinating. But its two leads are both very unconventional, like a very masculine looking quote unquote woman in Abby and a gay woman in Ellie. Ellie is again in a relationship with a woman. So I think it probably would have been as toxic if everyone went into it, but I think, it could have gone the other way because people, imagine everyone getting that on day one, these same toxic fanboys and being like, whoa, I have to play as this buff woman and who killed Joel. I think that would just blow their heads would blow up in a whole different way. And the reception would still be negative. Again, because I think there is a valid criticism about Joel dying so early on, and there is a fair discussion to have about that being the narrative that this story chooses to tell.
Yep.
And that would just get twisted into the whole LGBTQ hate rap thing.
Griner.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think the backlash would have been as bad. There obviously wouldn't have been the review bombings day one. But I think anybody who plays this game wanting a fun Joel and Ellie story is going to be very disappointed. Like, it is not that game. It's not The Last of Us 1. Like, it doesn't even... A lot of people have criticized this game to say the characters don't even reflect the characters that they were in The Last of Us 1. People have defended that to say that, there's time passed between the two of them. I don't know. But I definitely see the criticism there. Like, I think it's valid to say that Joel is very unceremoniously dispatched very early in the game. And he was the main character of the first game. He was half of the duo that you cared so much about in the first game. And he just dies so early and so suddenly and
brutally.
Yeah.
It's a pretty overt statement to be like, they're literally like, hey, we're going to kill this guy you loved. And Neil Druckmann, and I think it was him, or someone said it in the Last of Us podcast. They're like, we wanted to do this because the audience loved Joel, and we wanted to intentionally upset them and shock them and be like, hey, it's like the Game of Thrones sort of thing where you kill Sean Bean, and it's like, oh wow, this story has a whole new
Spoilers.
sense of stakes that I didn't know was possible. And I think the same thing happened with this. Like, they're very clearly trying to say we're not The Last of Us 1, and yeah, for better or worse.
So, like, yeah, that's the thing. I think we'll get into the whole argument about the story and the way Joel was taken out. I think if people don't have that expectation coming in, because I think most of the people that hate on this so bad didn't end up playing it. Like, there's a large audience of people that didn't play it.
There is a large audience that did play it and didn't like it too. I think it's unfair to say that everybody's criticism of this game is unfounded, because I do think there's people who played it and disliked it, and I think there is genuine criticisms to be had.
Absolutely. There's probably 2 or 3 out there, and like, what I'm saying is, I think the people who sent death threats and the people who review bombed it on day one and this really, really toxic thing wouldn't have had it if they played the game and experienced it. Because, like, my story is, I played this, I love Joel, she killed Joel, I hated Abby, and my main thing is this: when you take control of Abby, I was pissed off, and I sat there and I was like, I don't want to play
and
as
kept
her.
Walking into clickers and being like, kill me, kill me, kill me.
I was like, I don't want to play as her, and I was like, I know what Naughty Dog are doing, and I was like, don't do it. Don't try and make me care for this person. She killed Joel. And they did, though. They did do that, and they made me care about Abby, and they made me not want Ellie to get her revenge on her. And this is what, and Neil Druckmann did say this in an interview. The reason that they did that with Joel is they wanted to have you so angry with this character, like, be Ellie in that mindset, like this rage, because you love Joel so much and you want this. And they wanted you to get to that absolute brink of hatred and see how far they could pull you back with empathy, sort of thing. And that was their whole motivation, and that's the theme of this, is like, how far could they bring you back to not hate Abby like that. Now, and I know this for a fact because I remember, Conan, you messaged me on the release date of The Last of Us Part 2, and you messaged me this sentence. You said, I want to skin Abby alive.
And I stand by that sentiment.
I want to, and then I remember talking to you after you finished the game, and you liked Abby, and part of you said that you were sort of on Team Abby in a way because you really enjoyed that character.
Yeah,
and they succeeded in what they wanted to do with that. And I think a lot more people wouldn't have hated on the game had they gone through that same journey that me and Conan had. Now, Grana, you obviously weren't such a Last of Us fanboy like me and Conan, and didn't have this attachment and loyalty to Ellie and Joel. What was your perspective on Abby killing Joel and the whole empathy and Team Abby or Ellie sort of discussion?
So I intentionally went out and read the leaks when they leaked. I'm like, I'm probably never going to play this game. I might as well just read what it's going to be about. Hold this knowledge over Luke's head a bit or something like that.
He did on my birthday party. I remember.
One time I joked about it.
I know.
I never would have. I get the journey they're trying to take you on, and I went on that journey too. They definitely make Abby a sympathetic character by the end of it. Like, she's a character you care about. She's a character you don't necessarily want to have that fight with at the end. But it is a hell of a journey to ask the audience to come along with. Like, it really is. And this story is always going to turn people off, no matter how little political discourse there is around it, how little other elements there are to it. This story was always going to turn some people off.
Yeah,
by its very nature.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I do remember, like, Neil Druckmann saying early on, like years before the game came out, being like, a lot of people aren't going to like this. He's like, some people will dislike this and what the story we're going for. And like, a comparison he made was the first Last of Us is a game about love, and the second game is about hate. And like, this is the thing, and not everyone's going to be on board for that, but boy, there are a lot of people on board for hate. So.
Yeah, that's the famous line. Would you say that Druckmann cucked you into changing your attitude?
No, it's just pure.
Neither would I.
I was trying to make a pun, but empathy man. That he empathy man me. Yeah, that's a good one.
That
Um,
was weak.
so, okay, Conan, I'll start with you again. Did Joel deserve better?
Yes. Joel, R.I.P. T-Bakes, R.I.P. Tommy, R.I.P. everyone.
Tommy's still alive.
I think he just. Yeah, but he's dead inside.
He is. He really is. That poor.
I think Joel deserved better. I don't know if we talk about this now or later, but there is a very fair problem with this narrative direction with eradicating Joel. Look,
Okay,
I
I'll
really
just say, so we'll form.
Yep.
I'd have two questions down. We'll form it into one. Was this the right story to tell? And did Joel deserve better? Because I think they're pretty much aligned. So, Conan.
Yeah. All right, I'll give my best. I really respect Naughty Dog, like huge amount of respect for them and for Druckmann and for who's the other Heidi someone Haley
Haley
Grace,
Gross,
sorry.
yeah.
The two like they're two writers. So huge amount of respect for them for really like taking this chance. And I was just recently I was listening to another podcast about Terminator 2, and they were talking about how that sequel completely upends it, like flips so much of the formula around, but it's one of the best sequels because of that. And so, like, they're kind of going for the same thing. They're trying to make this phenomenal sequel that works because it is different rather than just treading the same ground. So I really admire them for taking that chance and being like, hey, we're a AAA game. We have such a loyal fan base. We're going to get hate. But these are the kind of risks that gaming should be taking more, and not enough is happening. But I love Joel so much.
Yeah.
Like, he is, besides just being super cool and suave, he's just super vulnerable. He's super relatable. He's super likable. He is such a phenomenally well done character, and it's kind of like the writing in the game is kind of, I call it Lindeloffian. It's like Lost. So it's very melodramatic and almost cliched over the top in ways, but it's so genuine that it's actually becomes phenomenal. And it's like this is an incredibly emotional ride that in lesser hands would be terrible and everyone would laugh at, but because they're just doing it so competently, it's amazing.
And the acting
And
helps
yeah,
tremendously with
like
that.
Yeah.
oh, without a doubt, yeah. And so I really do think, in a lot of ways, Joel's unceremonious dispatchment kind of flies in the face of a lot of what the first game is. The first game is almost like it's a story about love. It's about a father overcoming grief, and it's like a father-daughter relationship. And to kind of be like, "Hey, screw that. We don't care about that. We're going to upend it," is really frustrating. I I can't say definitively if this is the game we should have got because I think that this is a really valuable game to have in the medium.
Yeah.
But I often lie awake at night and wonder about the universe where we got a different sequel, and where maybe clean shaven, maybe not. I'm not sure. And playing The Last of Us 2, where Joel is exiled and Ellie's got to find him again, and so it's kind of like this weird inverse of the first game, but in that sense.
Grana.
Yeah, like did Joel deserve better? 100%. And I agree. Like I think, I think his fate is correct. Like I think Joel, as much as Joel is like the father figure in the first game, and it's a game about love, there's also deception there, right? Like their relationship is partly based on deception as well, and like
Yeah.
obviously the ending is a huge, kick in the guts. It's like obviously Joel loves Ellie so much that he's willing to do anything for her, but is he depriving humanity of a vaccine that could save everyone, right? So I
Yeah.
think, and you kill a lot of dudes in that first game. Like Joel is an incredibly violent character.
Yeah, there's a lot of bodies in this
Yeah,
game.
and like even when you play as Ellie, like it doesn't have that same
Brutalness.
yeah, brutality, right? Like Joel is the one. Joel is the cold-hearted killer, and I don't know. Is it Shakespeare or these violent delights have violent ends? Like I think Joel deserves.
That's
I think
Shakespeare.
Joel. I think Joel deserves a violent end. Like I think that's correct. I just kind of wish it took longer to get there. Like I wish we had more of a story with him and Ellie, um, before he dies. More time for them to bond, and obviously the game. Like I think the game does a pretty cool job with the flashbacks. Like I think the flashbacks are trying to give you that element that you're missing from the first game, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure it's enough.
I agree.
So that absolutely in this world, in the Last of Us world, Joel deserved this. Like, he had it coming. It's not even like it's a common thing. Joel's killed people in this way probably 100 times. That ironically, as this story says, was somebody else's father, or was somebody else's brother or son or something like that. And that's what this whole story is. Yeah, it could have been done at a later point in the game. Like, it is literally within the first 2 hours. But obviously, it's not all we get of Joel in Last of Us Part 2. I think my favorite scenes in that game are with Joel, like in flashbacks.
Yeah.
I think they're the most powerful scenes. And, like, obviously, like the birthday, like Dinosaur
Yeah.
Museum
Yeah.
chapter
Best
is
part of the game.
my favorite part of the game. And while playing that, I was like, I want this. Like,
Oh,
I want more Joel and Ellie. God damn it!
it's so
And it
beautiful.
was
My gosh.
ripped from me, from this bloody woman with massive muscles, and that just fed into my hatred. But like, it makes sense, and I get that. But that's life in a way. Like, that's what you don't get, like those happy endings with people. Like, people's lives are just cut short and cut quick, and it is like a thing. I know a lot of people who did have it spoiled for them had this whole thing of like, oh man, now I know how the game ends. Like, we'll be trusting this Abby person, and she kills Joel, and then 2 hours in, they were like, oh my god, it's already happened. Cool, I'm now spoiler free. Like, I can play the rest of this game. I don't know what's going to happen, and because no one expected it to happen straight away.
No.
Obviously, I feel like it's kind of obvious it's going to happen when you start playing the game. Like, and Abby's tracking someone, and you know what the whole story of number 2 is. And I had this whole belief the whole time. I was like, surely it's not Dina that gets killed, because that's what the whole belief heading into the game was, that they killed Dina in that room. And then Ellie's whole thing, they edited Dina from that point out in when she's exploring Seattle and stuff like that. They showed Joel in clips when he's not
Yeah,
actually in there. It's
they actively
Jesse.
misled you.
Like, but it's like, you wouldn't have cared after 2 hours with Dina. You wouldn't have cared to go on this massive revenge trip if Dina dies in that room. Like, you don't know her. It's not Joel. You're on a buddy adventure with Joel. Like, it doesn't have the same stakes. So I think for them to do what they wanted to do and tell the story that they wanted to tell, it was sort of essential to knock Joel for.
It is, but I mean, if you look at like the structure of the game, because it's pretty heavily built into it's very novelistic. Like, it leads to a midpoint, and then there's the reversal where it goes, you've played as Ellie, bam, now you play as Abby. And that was obviously the big shock to everyone's system. Like, wow, I'm going to play as this killer. And you've got that great parallel between her and Joel, and sort of the mirroring between her and Ellie, yada yada.
Yeah.
You could have done that to the same extent with Joel or something. Like, you could have had the first few days of some sort of reason, like, I don't know, Joel's exiled, or they've still had their falling out. Dina dies, and he's the only one Ellie can go to. And there's kind of like this cold, frosty relationship. And then the midpoint, where it's like, oh, they're going to restore their relationship finally, he dies. Like, I mean, I just don't want to start speculating, because I've got so many ideas about other versions of this story. But there's a lot of ways that I think they could have easily done it that gives Joel justice and doesn't subtract the emotional impact.
Yeah, there's like a lot of the flashbacks end up being about how Ellie is now so cold on Joel because she took her destiny away from him, right? Like, she wasn't sacrificed for mankind, and but we only see that in flashbacks. Like, I think you could have made a game about that turn, right? Like a game about her and Joel getting along, her finding out this secret, and then and then kill Joel, and make it a redemption arc there. But yeah, I don't know.
So would you make a whole game out of what's in the flashbacks as Last of Us 2, and then part 3 have Abby?
I honestly think that's my opinion. Like, make a middle game.
Yeah, but
I do. Yeah,
I'll just touch on what Conan was saying. I feel like one of the most impactful things for me personally playing this and is the final scene where Ellie decides, like, she says to Joel, I don't think I can ever forgive you for that, but I'd like to try. And like, that's their last meeting. Like, that's what I think is really having this thing that drives Ellie, is it's this unresolved thing. And she was so close, and they're talking, like, at the start when you're exploring with Dina, they're talking about, oh yeah, movie night, and you think it's the same old. We have this sort of life. Not that they haven't talked in 2 years and have just patched their relationship up the night before he's murdered. Like it's this unresolved thing that she didn't get to forgive Joel and have that relationship with him again, and that's what drives that hatred so much. And I think that's what makes the ending what it is, with her like having that flashback of Joel on the porch and like her saying that she can forgive him. That's what stops her from killing Abby at the end. And I think that has its all power because you didn't have that like closure with Joel.
Yes, I see what you're saying, but I think that choice is actually a bit of a misstep. Like, let me just preface by saying that that scene is great. Joel's love of coffee is so awesome. It
I love
resonates with
that
me a lot.
porch scene.
How much would he trade for coffee, Joel? You get me, man. But I think by actually doing that, because what that does is it then recontextualizes her whole quest. So her whole journey up to this point is fueled by anger and rage, and just that she's pissy that her father figure was killed. But then what that scene does is it kind of says, no, she's actually feeling guilty about all this. But that guilt is never explored in the game, and it's just kind of like, oh, okay, so she was guilty the whole time. Well, that's sort of I wish I had known that beforehand. That would have actually made a lot more sense than just her super just really angry and just I'm going to go and just kill everybody. And I think by waiting to the last moment to kind of use that as a oh, she never actually got to forgive him, I think it does a bit of a disservice. I think it subtracts a lot of her motivation and makes her a less relatable character, because at the end of it, I was pretty worn out by Ellie's journey. I was like, she is just descending into this like literal hell for almost comical reasons towards the end, where she's just like going crazy and just like, so blinded by everything else and just like, no, I'm doing this, and it gets frustrating. And I think with that guilt recontextualized, but that should have been there from the beginning. It's like, no, well, she's guilty of this, so no wonder she's fueled.
See, like I had that whole thing as well with Ellie, like on the farm when she's packing her bag to go again. I had a moment I was sitting there and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, no, like don't go try and find Abby. I was like, just live a happy life with your wife and baby on this farm. Like, let's go look at more sunsets on the tractor. Like, let's not go do this. I didn't want her to do that because I was worried about what was going to happen. But I don't know. It's Grana. What's your thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys covered it, but I think I don't know. The ending frustrated me a lot. Like, I do really. We'll get.
So,
Sorry, go
we'll
ahead.
get into it now. Should Ellie have killed Abby?
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, it gets into our other point of what is it, ludonarrative dissonance? Like,
That was next on the agenda.
It's like, I don't know, to go through this whole game and you're right, just Abby descending into madness and descending into hell and just obliterating literal armies of people
like an entire army
to get to Abby, and then to let her go.
Yeah, there's a problem there.
She lost everything except her humanity. She saved her humanity.
But she didn't. Like, who's not
murdered
going to be scarred
millions
by
of people.
murdering hundreds of people? Like, honest to goodness, she now deserves the same fate as Joel, and maybe that's where the next game goes. I don't know, but
oh man, they start the game with Ellie like getting brutally murdered by this new person, and Abby's like, "No, we had peace." And,
I don't know. Like, it just really detracted. And then, yeah, I don't know. Like, look, you're right. Like the farm scene, I'm like, oh yes, let's stay here. I don't know if you guys remember Red Dead Redemption 1, where you like have that farming simulator halfway through the game. Like, it reminded me of that, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. And now we have this revenge quest. But
again,
I was very over the gameplay by that point. Like, that last island, I was just like so done with. And then,
see, I feel like I know what you mean. I was pretty burnt out and like enjoyed it all, but I was burnt out and I wanted to see the conclusion. That was my main thing. My first playthrough, I was like, I want to see what happens. I want to know what's going on. Like, I want to finish this story. And so it frustrated me doing that. But I feel like that area, Santa Barbara, where you're fighting like the rednecks and with like the mullets and tans, and it's a sunny desert area, I feel like that does enough differently, and I feel like that's the only part of the game where I feel like they're like, here's a machine gun. Like this is sort of like an action. And gameplay wise, that's like one of my actual favorite missions of the whole game because I feel like I can just run through and take out all these guys like with
Run 'em
machine
down.
guns. And I like the setting. I feel like it feels enough different that it's actually, I feel like it's kind of like a rejuvenating push to get to the finish line. But
If there was a section of this game I would cut, it's not that. Like I would leave that in there
Yeah.
and make the time in Seattle shorter for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was just very over that, and then to get to the end, have this fight with Abby, to let it like it was meaningless to me. Like I wasn't like, oh, she saved her humanity or whatever you want to say it is. Like she's breaking the cycle of violence. Like it's meaningless when you've killed so many people along the way. Like it's ludicrous to think that that works.
so, Conan, I know this is you and Griner's like favorite word to throw around, like ludonarrative dissonance.
All right,
And but I'll start with the question: should Ellie have killed Abby? And I guess ludonarrative dissonance is the reason we'll get into it, and have a bit of a discussion on that.
yeah, I guess that kind of does fall. That kind of becomes the reason if you how you view its dissonance is how you view the ending. Obviously, there's that Polygon article. I don't know, I think it's Polygon, where one of the guys talks about Polygon ludonarrative dissonance specifically in this, and he kind of jokes, it's like I finally wrote an essay on this term because it's kind of a derided concept. A lot of people don't like it; they think it's silly. I think it's pretty relevant and pretty necessary to have, but it has become a bit of like a just leaning post for arguments where everyone's just like, "Oh, video games have ludonarrative dissonance, so they aren't good." So that's not really a proper understanding of it. But I think this game does suffer from it a fair bit. Like, there's a quote from the podcast that stood out to me. I think it's Ashley says it. She's like, the player is thinking, quote, I don't want to do this, but the game makes me do it. And so she talks about that as a point of praise, saying, oh, we force the player to do this. I think that actually embodies the problem with the game. That it tries very hard to be like, you shouldn't want to do this. This whole quest is meaningless. Revenge is terrible. Look at all the suffering. But how cool is it when you slit some dude's throat and stick the knife in it and you just slowly bring him down to the grass? Oh, it's catharsis. Like it really does it does a bad thing by making the killing so satisfying and constantly being like, look how evil everybody is. I'm going to murder them all and love it. And then the end does a bait and switch. It's like, no, you monster.
I I disagree with that. I feel like if any like thing that about Last of Us's gameplay, obviously it's satisfying as hell to do all this stuff, but I feel like more than any other game, they put this whole thing on about trying to make you feel bad for killing these people. Like literally, like the way enemies interact, they're calling each other by first name basis. Like they react like, "Oh my god, you killed Kenny, you bitch," like they react in this way and they do that. And because I feel like, yeah, you're slicing people's throats and they show it in such graphic detail that I don't know, like unless you're like a sociopath, you should feel a bit uneasy about what you're doing. And it feels really brutal. Like we talked about how Joel has this different feeling in gameplay that he's brutal. He does with like the strength and just like the bludgeoning strength of him. But Last of Us 2 is so much more brutal. I feel like in the way you kill people, like it's gory, like it's really gory, and it's horrific. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like the whole point that they try and do in this is that you should feel bad killing all these people.
But they still make you do it.
Mm.
Like you still have to do it to get through the game.
There's a few areas where you can stealth your way through and walk past.
You can, but it's
No, I know what you
I don't
mean.
know.
I know what
Yeah.
you
It's a
mean.
silly
I think
lineage.
it really tries to make it clear to you, like sometimes overly much, to be like, where it's saying, "Hey, you shouldn't be doing this. This is so wrong. Oh, look how terrible this is." Now here's a long part. Map out your kills really well. Make sure you pop that guy's head off, and it does encourage like it promotes you to play the game and enjoy it. Like in no way is this game trying to be like this is horrible to play. We want you to be
No.
miserable. It's like we want you to have fun because it's a video game. We want you to invest 25 hours into it.
It's like put a grenade on your bow and arrow.
Yeah,
Watch people explode.
Check out yeah, it's like so I think it does have that problem.
But I feel like their way around that in this story is that Ellie has a moment, obviously, when she murders Owen and Mel, and realizes Mel's pregnant, and has a moment where she realizes like, I'm a bit of a monster. Like I shouldn't. Dina's pregnant. This is my like relatability to that. Blah 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 or whatever.
This is bizarro me.
You know, but like has this moment where it makes her feel sick. She throws up. From that moment on, we don't play as her killing all these WLF soldiers again. We don't play with her again until Santa Barbara, where it's, you know, they'd be like, these guys are racist pigs who have like sex slaves in their dungeon and like they're got people on chains and they have slaves and stuff like that. And these guys are really bad. Here's a machine gun. You shouldn't feel bad about killing these people.
But that in
But once
itself,
Ellie has that moment in the story, she doesn't keep going on like a murderous rampage.
but that in itself does contradict it, right? Like it says, here's some good old fashioned bad guys to murder and enjoy doing it. By the way, the revenge and the bloodthirsty nature of your quest is what got you here in the first place. Like by making it fun at the end, it just kind of says, "Hey, it doesn't matter if we made you feel something. It's killing's fun."
It's the whole thing. It's a game. You've got to have that as a gameplay.
You're right. But there is a way to make a game that has a story that supports the gameplay and vice versa. The part for me that stood out the most was when Ellie kills Nora. Is it Nora in the hospital?
Yes.
Like, that to me was, I don't know, that was the part that stood out to me. It's like, this is just stupid. Like, I've chased this girl all over the place, and now I have to press the button to strike her, right? But I have done this 100 times to get here. Like, I have pressed this exact button to use this exact weapon to kill 100 people up to this point. But now this is the crossing point. This is where the room's all red, and I'm supposed to feel like Ellie's crossed over to the dark side.
Before that, it's all self-defense. This is a unarmed woman who's sitting there,
Come on.
who's just trying to be loyal to her friend, and she's like, "No, I'm not going to dob on my friend." Well, that's the thing. I feel like with that scene, they don't show. Obviously, Ellie reels from that, and it's like she's shaking and like covered in blood, and she's like, "I made her talk." We don't see that low, like. So it's.
And I think that's a disservice as well, though, because all we hear about how horrific it was, and we see Ellie getting bloodier, but we don't actually see, like when you see Joel and he's messed up, you're like, oh, this is horrible. I feel like the hatred of Abby, and thus I feel the hatred of Ellie against her.
Yeah.
Whereas here, you're like, Nora got killed brutally, apparently. I don't know. I didn't see it. How do I know what happened? Like, if you see her head split in two, and you go, wow, Ellie has gone effing off the deep end. But
just
instead,
like, she comes back wearing Nora's skull as shoulder pads.
She goes Hannibal Lecter, and she's like,
I made her talk.
So, yeah.
Dina's like, what the hell? This is a bit weird.
Yeah.
So, okay, but so you both think that Ellie should have killed Abby, and that would have made the story.
I don't think that fixes the story. Like, I don't think that fixes the problem. I just think it doesn't have the weight they want it to.
Conan.
I will answer that question. I just want to make this point before I forget. Like, regarding ludonarrative dissonance, compare that to number one. So in the first one, when you kill the surgeon,
yes.
So obviously the surgeon gets in the way. I can't remember. You don't have to kill him, do you? You can just walk in and you automatically kill him. Is that correct? Or
you don't have to kill the other two nurses in the room. You can leave them spare and you walk out with Ellie. The one that's Abby's dad,
spoiler,
has to gets murdered no matter what. Either some people walk in there with a flamethrower and light him on fire, but if you just walk up to him, Joel grabs his hand that's holding a scalpel and shoves it into his own neck, to kill him.
So so I think, at least for me, when it first happened, I shot him straight away in the head. I was just like, bam, get away from her. So I think everyone, or most people, did. And so what that does, that's a really good example of the game taking you on a journey where you're like, I want to kill this surgeon.
Yep.
The gameplay has encouraged this. It's made me who I am. And I do this because it's the gameplay needs it to happen and because I want to do it. Whereas the second one is trying to be like, hey, don't kill Abby. It's like, no, I still want to kill people. I still want to, because the gameplay's been making you kill people and have fun.
Do you want to kill Abby in that moment?
You want to kill everybody because, like, I've just loved killing everybody. Like, no one goes through Ares and just leaves everyone alive. You go there and you're like, I'm going to butcher them all and I'm going to kill the dogs with my axe because they're coming at me.
See, some people are like, I don't want to kill the dogs, but man, I don't want to avoid the dogs. Like, they're hard to avoid. Just go out and kill them straight away. Grana.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, let me answer. I'll actually answer your proper question. Yes, she should have killed Abby. I think in the story of revenge, Ellie has lost everything, but she still doesn't get revenge. That's kind of confusing. I think the idea is if she's pursuing revenge and that destroys it, she should at least get her revenge. She should have at the end like, well, I got it and nothing happened. I'm empty. Whereas by having her break the cycle but still lose everything is kind of counterintuitive. And there's a lot of fallout that I think is kind of like, well, but she saved herself. Why does she still suffer? Oh, because violence, regardless of what happens, ruin. I
I mean,
think
she
it's
still killed a lot of people, so it's
yeah, and so it seems super unsatisfying that. So I was Team Abby. I was at the end of it. I was like, I prefer Abby to Ellie, but I think Abby should have died because and that would have made more cyclical sense. Joel killed her father. She kills Joel. She in turn is killed. Like
yeah.
this, that's a cycle. Whereas if it's just the two of them, there is no cycle. It's just tit for tat. I think Abby really needs to die to cement the thesis of violence is cyclical, revenge is empty.
But it's
Instead,
breaking the cycle.
there
The
is no
combo
cycle.
breaker.
There's no cycle established. It says, "Oh, the cycle's broken," but like you never show me a cycle. You've just shown me revenge, and it was satisfying for me to play. But I'm also feeling bad. But I didn't even get revenge. Like it doesn't. It
It's an
doesn't do what it tries to
unsatisfying
do.
message. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like from my point of view, as I'm going through Seattle, day 1, day 2, day 3, I wanted to kill these people. I had this hatred for Abby. I wanted to kill them. I like. I wanted to kill Nora too. Like she's running away from me. I'm like, screw you. You know, she's like withholding information on Abby, who at this point I still really hate. I don't want to kill Abby at the end. And so therefore I'm in the same like obviously Ellie does want to kill Abby until she has that moment where she like remembers Joel, but I don't want to kill Abby. So it's kind of like I feel like I'm on in the same
But you,
thing with
you have
Ellie
so
now.
much more information than Ellie. Like the story arc of Ellie doesn't really make sense for her to just stop there. Like I've done so many like I don't know, I've committed a genocide up to this point, but I'm not going to kill this last person. Whereas you have been with Abby for the 10 hours they make you play as her. Like you have an understanding of her character that Ellie doesn't have.
Like she fights through all these people who are really horrible people, and she sees Abby on the beach, who isn't buff
Oh,
anymore,
she looks
is
terrible in that scene.
very thin. I didn't even like. I love that they do a play on it. There's a woman there with a braid, and
Yeah.
I automatically went to her, and I was like, "What's going?"
I think
And
everyone
then
did.
Ellie turned and like was like, "Oh," and I literally had a moment. I was like, "Who is this person?" I was like, "I don't know who this person is." And then I was like, "Oh my god, it's Abby." She's lost all her muscle. She's beaten. She's sunburnt. Like Ellie has a moment. She lets her down. They both walk to the boat. Ellie goes to hop in her boat. That's when she has a moment. She's like, "What am I doing? Like, I've come here. Am I just going to beat the crap out of this woman who was like hanging on this thing, hanging by dear life, who has this little boy with her? Am I just going to, I'm just going to murder her now?" And she goes to hop in her boat until she has like a PTSD flashback of Joel in that room. And then she like grabs her knife and she's like, "No, I this is how I fix this. This is how I deal with this in my head. All I have of memories of Joel are these bad traumatic flashes, like these PTSD flashbacks that she's having. And then when she's about to kill Abby, she is like Abby's on the verge of death. She has like a PTSD flashback of Joel on the porch where she was ready to forgive him, and it's like this good memory, and it stops her from that because I feel like I don't know if there's a comparison about she was ready to forgive Joel for doing what he did, which was killing Abby's dad, and now maybe she should do that for here. And it's not like she's going to be friends with Abby, like they're going to have movie night. She's like, "Go, just go, whatever." Like, and holds her bloody fingers that Abby bit off. Like it's brutal, and now she can't play Future Days, and it's really, I love the ending, and I think what they did was the right choice as far as I'm concerned. Like,
Wouldn't it have been better if, when Ellie has that flashback, Abby takes out a guitar and she's like, "Oh, just let me play this song," and then Ellie's like, "Oh, you play
And
it
they sing
too!"
together.
Like
it
exactly,
would
and they
have
kumbaya on the beach.
it would have broken my immersion a little bit, but maybe if Lev was in the boat and he just like appeared, like rose up, like strumming the
Floats up
guitar.
from the water. But imagine if Joel. So you've seen Joel die. You've been like, "I love that guy. He's died. Okay, but I understand Abby." In the same way, oh, I understand Abby. She dies. I'm upset, but I understand Ellie. Like that would have made a much more thematically mirroring end, right? Like just as you hated Joel dying, but then by the end of it, you're like, yeah, I understand why it's all happened because I spent this journey. I hate Ellie. You hate Abby dying, but I understand why it's happened because I've been with Ellie on this journey.
Yeah, like that makes sense too. But we need a star for Last of Us 3, so you can't kill Abby. But all right, we'll get into some positive stuff. So, favorite moment from the game, Conan. We sort of touched on it earlier. I don't know if that is your defining favorite moment from Last of Us 2, but
Rocket ship to the moon.
yeah,
Oh, it's so good.
why?
That scene actually came out of kind of left field. I was not expecting there to be a moment of that sort of like simplicity, but of such beauty. And I really was, as I was watching it, and Joel's just like, he whips out the tape, and it's like, it's gonna be badass. And it's just this beautiful
You're gonna make
moment
me cry.
where, for one last time, it's like Ellie could be a child again. And obviously,
Mm.
you've already played the first game where you've seen her losing her childhood, but still having some trace of humanity. And then you've been playing this game and you've seen her losing all her humanity. It's like, wow, it's just an incredibly touching moment and a really great character moment. It's really needed. Grant, you mentioned it before. These flashbacks are really important. Like, they break it up, and they're where all the development in the background is, and they're really necessary for the pacing of this game because it's so heavy-handed. And it's like you need these moments of slight brevity to just like take a breather and be like, hey, there is good in this world. Because all I'm seeing in Seattle is rain and terror.
Grana, your favorite moment from the game?
Like, I agree, that's a great moment. Had a few written down. There's a few I enjoyed from a gameplay perspective. Like, I quite enjoyed the open world kind of little section you have at the start. Like, I think that's kind of fun, and I kind of wish they had explored that a bit more. Maybe like it's kind of nice just riding around the world. Oh, here's a armored van. I'm going to open this up and see what's inside. Oh, there's clickers inside. You know,
Yep.
little moments like that. Like, I think that could have been a interesting format for the game. Obviously, they didn't go that way. When you actually get to use the rope mechanics, because I think they were sick, but they're very, very underused in this game. But the other one, the main one I wrote down, other than the dinosaur museum, is there's a moment, and it's just a random moment when you're playing as Ellie, but there's this flat that I saw that you could get into. So I climb up, I get in there. There's a bunch of loot. I'm like, sick. This is like every other flat that you break into in the game. There's a bunch of loot. And then there's a crafting bench, and you go and you use the crafting bench, and these dudes attack you out of nowhere. And I jumped out of my skin. Like, it really was like, what the hell is this game doing to me? It was just a really surprising moment. Like, they kind of broke their rule. Like, I feel like there's a rule, like, oh, this is a crafting bench. There's no danger here. Like, I can do whatever I
It's my
want.
safe space.
And they just turned that on their head, and I thought that was fun. A good little, moment.
No,
Yeah, it's
I
great.
love that crafting bench. You say crafting bench, everyone knows straight
Yeah,
away.
everyone knows what you're talking about.
That damn crafting bench. It scared the crap out of me. And I didn't feel safe at any crafting bench after that. I was like, but like, that's really interesting because, like, you know, they're hiding in that room. Like, there's a locked door that you can't get into before you do that. And apparently, if you do like the sound thing, you can sort of see people in there, but you can't get in there. And it's like, obviously, there's a note in there about they actually have left the WLF because they think they're bad guys. They're three nice people that are like, they're murderers. We can't be part of them. But then they come out to attack Ellie because they think she's stealing their stuff.
It's a
But
great moment. Wait, what's your favorite moment, Luke?
Like, yeah, it's the birthday thing. Like, it's just so jolly. It's such like, I know you hate that word, but I love it. It's so heartwarming. It's what I want. Like, it's what I love with Joel and Ellie's relationship. And you don't have that in this game. And it's so heartwarming. And it goes way longer than I expected it to. You know, like, when flashbacks, you expect it's like this little moment. And that's like an hour long that you get to actually fully explore. Every time something happened, I was like, oh, cool, the spaceship. And it's going to fade back to reality. And it's really depressing and rainy in Seattle. And then they get out of that, and then you go across to another thing. And but it has the cool ending as well, like walking around that the area with the boar and the blood written on the wall, like, you know, that I did all this stuff in the name of the Fireflies, and they lied because they didn't create a cure or whatever, you know, like I forget what he writes on there, but something about lying.
I think it just says liars, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's just lies.
I
just
think
lies
there's like a
written
scene where
across the thing.
Joel stands in front of the S for a moment, and it's like, ooh,
Yeah,
it's good visual storytelling.
But
I was thinking that moment where Abby goes into that hotel, and it's like, again, you just have to like keep getting deeper and deeper. It's just pitch black, Oh, it's
it's
so
pretty
good.
That's
And you got to find the mask.
so.
Yeah, I love it.
So, from a gameplay perspective, Ellie or Abby, like Abby's very much more action, and I feel like very much more horror. Like you get all the horror stuff in Abby's story, like the descent down that hotel, the Rat King in the at Ground
Yeah.
Zero, which is truly terrifying.
And a shitty boss
What
fight.
did you guys prefer? Like that different thing? Did you enjoy playing as Abby more? I'll go with Grant first.
I think I liked Ellie more. I think I enjoyed playing her more.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't enjoy the clickers, fighting the clickers as much. I don't think.
Yeah.
And you've fought less of the whatever, I can't remember the third
Seraphites?
faction's name. Yeah, you fought less of them, and I hated fighting them.
Why? Just
Oh,
because
they just kicked my ass basically. They'd whistle
The
and I'd get
whistle.
hit by an arrow, and I'm
Yep.
like, shit.
that first arrow scared the crap out of me as well.
Such a
Yeah.
great
It's-
moment.
Conan, who do you prefer to play as?
So, yeah, I don't know. I kind of agree. Like, the clickers are the least interesting part of the game in terms of the combat's pretty repetitive. You want to fight enemies because it's just interesting. I think it's really fascinating how, Luke, what you're saying, Abby's more action. Like, Abby is the Joel model.
Abby's Joel.
She has she uses those techniques. She has shivs. She there's a couple of other things. Like, she has the same item set as him, whereas Ellie's got different ones. Like, she is literally the replacement playing character of Joel, and it's a really clever way of making you empathize with her through like these games just are phenomenally well told stories in a game medium as well because of things like this, where it's like it actually makes you like her because you're like, oh, I'm playing as Joel. Like, this is how I played as Joel. I did these things. I used shifts for these things, but I'm doing the same thing as Abby. And it's a really great way to make you be like, oh yeah, I understand this. I relate. So I think that's cool. Ellie's sections are more interesting though, I think, overall. Abby's got like the horror stuff with Abby's I like, but Ellie has the Seraphites, which I find are really interesting and also really scary. Abby has a lot of time like going through the sky on the weird sky bridge they do.
Yeah.
I like
it's
the
a cool,
bridge though.
like it's a cool cinematic scene, but it's kind of not that interesting to play.
Yeah, I liked the visuals and like I enjoyed the idea, but Abby's wasn't as interesting, I don't think, to play.
Least favorite part of the game, Grana.
The length. This game was just
okay, yeah,
it was too long for me.
Conan, I'll quickly get your opinion, and then it'll bring me on to my point about this game.
All right. Least favorite part. I mean, the game was too long. That was one of my criticisms. I had a few nitpicks. Yeah.
I was just gonna say I had another least favorite part, and that was the awkward sex scene. I don't know. The game descended into like a CW drama for me at that point. I'm just like, ugh. Everybody's got to be in a love triangle, and like every character that's important has to be pregnant because that makes them more important. Like, I don't know. They're bad tropes, badly done.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of those. That scene went for ages, and when Jesse finally comes in, he's like, "Joel's gone." It's like, "Thank you, bring me out of this bloody." And that whole like red herring where that old guy, and they're like, "Oh, he was really weird, and he used to be a firefly." That doesn't go anywhere ever again.
Mm.
You know the guy I'm talking about, like.
Which part, sorry?
So when you first play as Ellie, really, they're exploring that place, and they go to like
old
guy, some old friend of theirs.
Yeah,
and it's always like it's a real mystery about it. It's like, oh, who is this dude? Like, he used to be this, and he used to be that, and then it's just kind of like you never hear of that again. And I think my least favorite part though would either be the fact that the Seraphites didn't make you use listen mode. They should have made you use listen mode. That was a really, really bad misstep. Imagine if they're in the grass and you have to listen to see them because they're like sneaking through the grass so you can't see them.
But then
that would have made the combat so much more interesting.
No, how? Because then it's just they're white blobs everywhere and you know where they are. A lot of people don't use listen mode because it's like
this game forces you to use
crutch.
It. Because they come in when the Seraphites are introduced, you hear those creepy whistles and like, what the shit's going on? And then an arrow hits you and you're like, oh dear Lord, I'm not safe anywhere. I can't see anything. And then you sort of see them climb out of the trees, and it's like, who are these people? But then they're just normal enemies from then on. They're a bit more like duck and jive, but they're still just humans. Whereas if they had been if they combined you to use elements of like how you fight clickers and how you fight humans, it would have been a really clever choice, I think. Like force like
Yeah.
where if they could hide and you were like, I can't just see you from my third person perspective, I've got to use listen mode. That would have been really interesting. But they've flanked me on both sides. Crap. Because I was just sitting here behind a tree
Yeah.
looking. That would have been super
Yeah.
tense.
Yeah.
That's my
True.
choice.
I'll say like my thing with this, and this is what I was talking about earlier, how I enjoyed the second playthrough more, is my first playthrough, like the pacing and as in like the length of it. It was I felt burnt out, and I think I realized why during my second playthrough. Now you're playing it through and you do Seattle day 1, 2, and 3, and then you come to like the climax of that whole arc, which is the confrontation between Abby and Ellie in the theater,
Yep.
um, and then it resets and it like goes back all the way to Abby and her dad like finding this zebra, and you're like, okay, some context for who Abby is before we fight her, and then it goes, okay, day 1, Seattle, and I was like, okay, wait a minute, what's going on? I'm playing as Abby, okay, and like I was like, all right, oh okay, I have no skills or inventory built up. Like you got to build up her separate
Yeah.
stats, and I was like, it's like a hard reset on the game, right at like the story climax that you've been wanting to have this revenge. And it's like, okay, hard reset, come back, do this, and like that first day goes for a few hours, and I'm playing that, and I'm like, okay, cool, and then it like fades to black, and I'm like, okay, cool, and it's like day 2. And I'm like, oh shit, we're just gonna do all 3 days. And I was like, oh, I'm not ready. Like I remember it was like late at night, and I was like, I thought I could finish this tonight. And I was like, I want to get back to that theater, and that's the problem. My first playthrough, I didn't enjoy Abby's sections as much because the whole time I was pushing to get back to that theater. I was like, okay, are we at the theater now? Oh, okay, no, that's day 3, and this is only day 2. Okay, now we've got to go through day 3. I wanted to get back to see that climax because I was so invested in that story, and I get what they're doing, but I feel like with such a story, an important story moment to do that at, it's jarring to go back and then do that, and it really messes the pacing up, I feel. And my second playthrough, when I knew the outcome and I knew what was going to happen, and I was like, okay, now it's Abby's turn and like her 3 days, I was able to enjoy that so much more than I did on my first playthrough. Conan, you played it a second time. Did you have that same experience, or
Yeah, no, I didn't have your experience. I think it does. The game is still a bit long. Like
it
it's
is?
very
Yeah,
novelistic. It tries really hard to like unpack both sides and get it lots of mixed perspectives. It's like it's 25 hours or so. This game.
Yeah.
yeah. You can finish it your second playthrough under like 20 hours or so, like
Yeah,
18 hours or
To
so.
me, they should have cut a day from each side. Like not necessarily cut a day out, but cut the length of a day.
yeah.
Yeah,
I do think.
So cut 2 days. Yeah.
Yeah, again, I like the narrative idea where it's like it twists. It's the midpoint, and you go, okay, cool, I've done this now. I get this whole other side. But I do think, yeah, by just making you do the same, almost what feels like the same thing again, it's like you're just making me play the same game twice as part of one story.
And they're not different enough characters to really justify it. Like they're pretty
No,
similar.
yeah, no, and you're right. Their quests are fairly similar. They're just like we're going to kill lots of people, and that's bad. But man, I love killing,
Mm.
yeah.
and I hate Manny. Manny
So
sucks. Manny
Manny,
sucks.
I hated Manny because obviously he's the one that spits on Joel, but I grew to like him. But then also super was cheered
Oh,
when Tommy
that
just blew
shot,
his head
man.
off in front of Abby. All of a sudden, he just comes out and just destroys him. And you're like,
And
yeah,
spending
get
yeah,
revenge, Tommy.
spending so much time with Manny, I got really over that. I was like, he frustrated me.
Yeah. Um. So, we'll do a quick little side thing on side characters in this. I think there's quite a diverse list of side characters in this game. So we won't go too much into each of them. Just want your general thoughts on them. Conan, we'll start with you. With Jesse.
11 out of 10. He's a mini Joel. He's he's the Joel of the future, but he's not anymore because he's dead.
No.
but he also
Yeah,
barely
RIP.
exists.
But he's kind of just got that cool, that cool sort of stoic, like reserved nature. He's very charming. I
Yeah.
like Jesse.
How'd you feel when he died?
Oh, again, I was like, skin the bitch who shot him. I was
Yeah.
mad.
It's brutal. It
It
comes out
is.
of nowhere too.
Yeah.
You just walk through a
It
room
does,
and
yeah.
boom, headshot. Grana, any other thoughts on Jesse?
No, I just think he's underused.
Yeah.
But
Like I like what we got, and I could go more, sort of thing. But it was a shame when he died. I was really like, no, not again.
Oh, it's such a bummer.
Dina, Grana.
I like Dina. I think Dina is the Ellie of this game. Like, she's the one with the heart and the soul and the a little bit of naivety, not so much. I did mention it before. I do think this game likes to make characters pregnant to make them more important. Like, and that's that's a media trope. It's kind of sexist. Like, I think it is kind of problematic, and I don't think it's really aids it hugely in this story. But yeah, no, I like the character.
Yeah. Conan.
I don't know if it's problematic. I think it's just a really clear way of, like, it's clear visual storytelling, because that way you can have Ellie be like, "I've shot a pregnant person," and everyone's like, "Oh, that's really bad."
Oh, that's like Dina. Like, there's also an element like in Shaun of the Dead when they cross paths with the bizarro version of themselves. Like, there's a parallel for every character on the other side. It feels like
There really is. Yeah.
It's like
Dina.
it definitely has that visual thing. Otherwise, Mel could be there, like in a dying breath, being like, "I'm actually a mother of two. I'm a good person."
She's like, "Give this to my children.
Tell my sick mum I loved her." And Ellie's like, "No,
I was one day from retirement."
my last day on the job.
Yeah. Dina, she was fine. I don't know. I kind of got like some manic pixie dream girl vibes about her, and I was a bit like, I didn't really care that much. You're right. She's definitely she is the Ellie. She's the sort of the more light-hearted side of it, but she's no Ellie.
Because
she doesn't have that childlike, I've got to be tough, but I'm also clearly vulnerable. She's just a bit more like
sarcastic, like
just kind of sarcastic the whole time, but
more
also
silly,
but she's also like, but I can just kill everyone just as well as you. I'm like, I don't know if I believe that.
That's the thing. Like, I don't know. That's the reality of this world. But Ellie obviously in this one loses like that levity and lightheartedness that she has in the first one. Like, Ellie's great in the first one. She's this little kid reading a joke book and puns and this, and we get flashbacks to that in the dinosaur mission, which is why I love that mission so much. But yeah, the rest of it, she's really cold-hearted, murderous woman. So
she's pretty one-dimensional, unfortunately.
I wouldn't say
she is.
I think that's why I think I prefer Abby, because Abby does have the complexity that Ellie's lacking. Because Ellie's just like, I got to kill. I'm angry.
I think like a lot of it comes, like the whole Team Abby versus Ellie discussion comes a lot from people's relationship with Ellie before too. Like, my wife had watched number 1, and then played through number 2, and she was 100% like Team Abby. Like, my wife like loved Abby. She was like, Abby's awesome. Like, don't kill Abby. Like, I'm really on Abby's side. While didn't have that same connection with Ellie from like the first game, and that sort of fatherhood thing that you have as Joel. So kind of an underutilized character, I'll say. So Isaac. So the leader of the WLF.
I saw him on your list, and I'm like, I legit remember nothing about this guy.
I remember that he's
the guy from Westworld.
I forgot. Yeah. Casino Royale. I've forgotten his name. He's a really good actor.
I should have written it down. It's always on my head, but the leader of the WLF. That's like gets.
You keep saying that,
Jeffrey
but
Wright.
It still means
Jeffrey
nothing
Wright.
to me.
Jeffrey Wright. He's
Jeffrey.
Abby gets introduced to Abby. He's torturing a guy in a room, and Yara kills him in the forest when they make their attack on the Seraphite Island.
Yeah, I think he's very underused. Like, you see him, you hear about him a lot. Everyone's like, "We got to take this to Isaac. We've got to go see Isaac." And then he pops up for like 2 scenes. He's kind of got that like kind of mysterious bad guy vibe. But
he has menace to him. Like, I was intrigued. I was like, "Oh man, I'm not looking forward to the confrontation with Isaac." And then he does get taken out pretty quickly in a cutscene.
Yeah,
like Yara's last stand.
Yeah, he's all talk.
Well, speaking of Yara and Lev, the combo of the two. Griner, what were your thoughts on these two? I think without these two characters, you don't really have that empathy for Abby. Like it's through these two that you get that story.
Well, and it does feel like that's the only reason they exist, right? Like they only exist to make you sympathise with Abby. Like they only exist as a foil to make Abby a more sympathetic character. It's weird.
It works though.
It does, but it doesn't feel justified. Like I don't know that Abby should have this big of a connection to these two characters that she does.
Yeah, I think it's more. It's like obviously it's not based off their personalities. I think it's more like this thing that she has about that she needs to rescue because like she's got stuff on her conscience. She's got blood on her hands, and I guess like this is her way to redeem herself is like saving these two kids. I do love the line that she says to Lev though that like you're my people when he's like your people killed Yara just then, and she's like no, like I'm not them, I'm you, like I'm like this is us. Sort of
It's her distancing herself from the WLF. Yeah, and I just don't think. I don't know. I think their whole arc is a bit strange.
with the Seraphites and
Yeah, I just didn't even want to. Part of this is because I was so over playing the game by that point. Like I didn't want to go to the Seraphite Island. Like I didn't want to do all that stuff there. But I enjoyed. Like I enjoyed doing the skyscraper with Lev and going through that hotel, that dark hotel.
Yeah.
Like that was fun. Yeah, I think they were fine characters, but they also struck like I don't know. It's a bit of a trope where like the small kid, like little kid, is way stronger than they should be. Like they're taking out adults, shooting arrows really accurately. Like these two kids are superheroes, basically.
Yeah, Conan.
They aren't really characters in a lot of ways. I think Yara's the sister, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Lev's definitely got a problem there of just like exposition, where everything is just like they walk through somewhere and Lev goes, "Hey, what's this?" And Abby goes, "It's this," and Lev goes, "We don't have that as a Seraphite." There's a lot of really stilted conversations like that where Abby says "cool" and he's like, "What's cool?" It's like,
yeah, that's real dumb.
I know it's trying to be cutesy. The biggest problem I think is to what you're saying, Grant. With Joel in the first one, we see that he has a daughter and he loses his daughter. Sarah dies, and we're like, Joel is a father. That's how he's defined.
Yep.
And so Ellie is a surrogate, so we totally get why he falls into this relationship. Abby's not a mother. Abby is
or as far as we know, doesn't have a little kid, like a little brother, like sibling or whatever.
Exactly.
Like...
We have no. If she does, we should have known that.
Yeah.
Or we know. Yeah. As far as we know, she is just like a lonely loner on a lonely road alone because her dad's dead, and all of a sudden, like she's devoted her life to the Fireflies, then the WLF, and then just randomly she's like, "Oh, I'm a mother now or a sister." I don't know. It feels kind of they're clearly just trying to mirror Joel and Ellie, which is a fine direction.
Yeah,
but there is an ingredient missing in the metaphorical cake.
So, you mentioned that Abby's alone and a loner, which brings us to our next character, Owen. Her love interest. But much more, I like Owen. I really like Owen.
Yeah, I like Owen. I think he's kind of charming.
So, yeah, Conan, talk about Owen.
At first I didn't like him much, but he's kind of aloof, but I don't know, there is something really disarming about him where he can tell he doesn't want to be on this path. Because he's always going to the boat and he's like, but he doesn't really know, know how to express that. And he's stuck in this relationship with Mel that he's like, he doesn't really like, but he also kind of does. He's interesting.
He's also having a child with though, like.
Yeah, it's weird. And like, he's obviously like a real coward of a character. And there is something like he's really pitiful in a lot of ways, but in the same way, it's like, I totally get why, because he's like the disillusioned Firefly. So he needs something. He's like, my life is meaningless. In the same way that Ellie's constant crux is that her life is meaningless now that she wasn't sacrificed at the hospital. Owen's kind of like, our cause is done. What are we doing? We're fighting for these causes that are arbitrary. And so everything in his life is kind of meaningless. But he's also he's not like misanthropic. He's very like fun and like, has the archery game in his aquarium. And he has an aquarium.
I love the aquarium.
I think it's cool. Yeah. There's lots of
like
things
you go through the different seasons and the warm lighting and it's Christmas time and
he's really likable, I think.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I really like playing it through the second time. I feel like has so much more impact because when you kill him as Ellie, you've only seen him in that room with Joel up till then, and then you walk in, you shoot him, that's it, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's Owen, blah blah blah, and then you play it through, and by the time you finish, you're like, Owen's awesome. I really like Owen. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I murdered him. Like, I killed him. No, I wrecked that whole thing. I killed Mel as well. That's good, but Owen died.
It adds a real
Griner.
tragedy to it. Yeah.
Any thoughts on Owen?
Yeah, he's very likable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned before the awkward sex scene. He's the only character who seems to have the right idea of what to do in that world. Like, get on a boat, get out of there, keep moving.
Yeah.
I don't know, find something better for yourself.
And that's the thing. He's almost like the Dina to Abby, where he keeps trying to bring her back from the brink of darkness. He's like, why are we going here? Like, why?
Yeah.
Just have fun. Like, let's just live in my aquarium with this skeleton in a chair. Like, let's have fun, you know? And Mel can come along on trips too with my son or daughter. But and last but definitely not least, a good man, Tommy.
Tommy
Conan.
gets a raw end of the deal.
Poor Tommy, man. Goes through some shit.
It's a rough life for him.
It's so tragic, and again, it's a testament.
Final scene with him though is just,
gosh, yeah, it's a testament to Naughty Dog storytelling, and just the way, you know, that line. He was like, "Oh, we're taking a bit of a break right now." It's like, oh man,
yeah,
that's just stop it, Tommy.
He's lost everything.
His face is all left up. Like,
yep.
I think he does get an undue punishment. I think in this, and this kind of relates back to what we're talking about Ellie killing Abby. And how Tommy, in the context of this game, Tommy he really does just like, he's a pure victim. And it's like, he shouldn't be, I feel. Because he tries to do right by his brother and by his perceived justice. And Ellie doesn't get revenge. And so Tommy's just like, he's just got screwed over and just gets nothing to show for it now.
Yeah.
Like, he's going to be chasing Abby forever.
But is that not then what Ellie's trying to avoid when she doesn't kill Abby and decides to forgive her? Like, she doesn't want to beat Tommy. Tommy's the one that's hobbling into a damn farmhouse while she's like nursing her baby, and he's lost everything in this pursuit of revenge. Has lost everything
in Ellie's quest, though. In a lot of ways, like, he did it for Ellie.
Yeah,
but like, he's thinking he's forever now going to be like, I've got to kill Abby. Whereas if Abby was dead and Ellie's like, I killed her, don't worry, here's her head.
Ellie would just come back and be like, no worries, I got her, man.
Yeah, and Tommy would be like,
dead.
Sweet. Finally, I can rest.
She can just say that, low, and Tommy can go and be happy again.
Yeah, somehow they can track other people in this world without any communication. Like,
traitors, man. He says there's traitors.
I spoke to a guy who saw a buff woman. It has to be her. Let's go all the way across the country. Grana, any thoughts on Tommy as a character?
No, there's no use of shed. Like, he's a very sad character by the end of it.
I feel so bad for, and like, I feel like he's the character he keeps surviving when I feel like he died. Like, in that room with Joel, I thought they killed him as well. I'm like, oh my god, they're taking Tommy out and Joel. And then when Abby shoots him in the face, I'm like, oh, they killed Tommy again. And then he shows up at the house, and I'm like, oh my god, he's back again.
Man of Steel.
But I like the whole gameplay point of him being the sniper as well, though. Like, and trying to get to him, and it's a cool little gameplay thing. So in regards to cut content, so we got reader mail here from Reddit. So this comes from your boy Dan Sup. Just asking if you guys are aware of the cut content from the game, and if you are, do you think it should have been included, or should it maybe just be in a director's cut down the line, like in a PS5 remaster or anything? Conan, I'm guessing you probably would know more about cut content than Griner would, but...
One would think so, but I don't.
But you don't. So the 2 or 3 main things that were cut. So there was this whole... Joel had a girlfriend.
I did know that, actually.
A lot of way through this game. He had a girlfriend named Esther. And there was going to be flashbacks involving her and Joel. Mostly the one where Tommy's teaching Ellie to use the sniper. It was actually going to be like a trip with Joel out to visit Esther, who lived about 2 hours away from Jacksonville. And they were going to go out there, visit. Was going to end up that she found out she had a bite after like running with some clickers while they were there or something like that. and Joel tells Ellie to like go down to the dam, get her some water, and then when Ellie goes down there, hears a gunshot, and she doesn't know if Esther put it on herself or if Joel took her out or whatever, you know. Um, so that's probably the main thing that they talk about. They had scripts, they'd recorded stuff. They were really going to have this character in there, but they found they were running out of time to really introduce her and have you know this character and stuff like that. How does that sound? You got like, how does that sound to you guys? More Joel, so
Yeah, I would have loved it. It's like Lord of the Rings. If you like Lord of the Rings, you love the extended cuts. Like, I would play a 35-hour version of this game. I'd still have the same complaints, but I'd be there for it 100%. And more Joel, more seeing him work his magic with the ladies.
That doesn't that just sound like the trope of every zombie movie? Is like, oh, my loved one's got a bite, and I don't know, like I didn't know about it till the last minute, and now I have to put them down.
Yeah, but it's Joel.
It's Joel.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think like, and the reason it was cut, it doesn't add much to Joel's like relationship with Ellie, or like it doesn't do too much. Would happily play it in a director's cut or like an extended scene, but I don't think it fits in the role of the game. And mostly the other thing that I can find is apparently originally there was going to be Seattle up till day 5. So there's going to be 5 days in Seattle. And at one point, Ellie was going to visit the Seraphite Island as well, like through a boat wreck or something like that, was going to end up on the island and do that. But I don't know if I'd be down for that. I like just the one sort of glimpse you get through Abby at the destruction of the island. But yeah, what would you guys think, Grana?
No, I don't need any more days. I'll just cover this quickly, but I think video games have an issue with having like, here's a cinematic story that in a movie would be 2 hours long. We have to make a 25-hour game. And so, like, characters meander to get to places. They include stuff like 2 extra days in Seattle where they go to the island. Like, stuff like that is unnecessary to me. I want all games to be shorter.
And I think that comes from what we were talking about at the start of this, the entitlement of gamers, though. Like, you still hear it like, I'm not paying $70 for Returnal. Like, it's a 10 hour, even though it takes people 40 hours to finish, but like, it's a smaller indie game, or it's only this hours long. I'm not going to pay that amount for a game that's this long. But
yeah,
that is the difference between people who have full-time jobs and kids and commitments, and people who have not much money and plenty of time. But anyway.
Yeah.
If I find out a game is 10 to 15 hours, I am there. Like, I'm so much more open world stuff. I'm like, it's a struggle now. So
yeah, it's funny, for a while it's like that was the benchmark. Every game was like, how big is this compared to Skyrim? Can I get 150 hours out of it? Is it an open world? And that was kind of what every game tried to be. But yeah, like as you get older and life changes, you're like, no, wait, that's the opposite of what I want. I don't want to have to spend 150 hours. Give me 5 hours and I'm happy.
I want to sit down one night and play through a game and experience its whole thing.
Be done.
Conan, any thoughts on Ellie visiting the Seraphite Island?
I don't know. Probably not. 5 days is too many days.
Yeah, especially if they double it up for both characters. That's 10 days.
And I don't know what the point of her being there is.
No, I guess it would be just to get her perspective on it, but like you don't need it without Abby and Yara and Lev.
It's very much their story, and it's very much like the Seraphites only exist as an antithesis to the WL.
Yeah.
So just having Ellie turn up kind of makes no sense. What I would want to see is Tommy's days.
See, that's what I thought would be the DLC, is Tommy's day 1, day 2, day 3 Seattle.
That'd be sick.
And I'm down for that, because you keep hearing about stuff like, oh, he's been spotted doing this at this place, and
he was messing shit up before Ellie got there.
It's one of the best things about that part is how you keep hearing this story of this dude who's like this I don't know what they call him. It's not a tourist, but they're just like, there's this dude who's just killing people, just making problems, and then you find out he's a sniper. And it took me a lot longer than it should have to realize, oh, that's Tommy wrecking the place. But I think it's really cool just having it like there's this other wrench in the wheel. And so it'd be great to see Tommy's perspective, and just like then he hears about Ellie and he's like, oh, they're hunting someone else as well. That'd be really nice.
There's this crazy woman killing everybody, like slitting just all their throats.
She seems to have no care about her actions. She loves revenge.
Yep. And we had another question from Hindelburg. So I sent this one to you, to you guys in the chat. What other media can be compared to Last of Us 2 in the way that it was hated by a bunch of fans for doing something a bit different, but overall might be remembered fondly, and is like Last of Us 2, I think, is rated as one of the best games of all time. The comparison that he used was that like the Beach Boys album, like there was an album that they released that was different than their previous stuff, and a lot of their hardcore fans hated it because it mixed things up, but it's regarded as one of the best albums of all time. Conan, what do you think about this? I think something that I thought of that's not really people hated it once they saw it, but when it was announced, like Heath Ledger's Joker was this thing that everyone, like universally on the internet, just panned it as like, this is a joke. There's no way
The
it
guy
would be
from
good.
10 Things I Hate About You is going to be the Joker.
Exactly, and it's now regarded for the rest of the time like that's the Joker.
Yeah.
Like there can't be anyone else. Everyone else mimics Heath Ledger's performance. Conan, is there anything comparisons that you can draw?
Yeah, I think music, that message that he left was really insightful. Music's a good comparison. Like I've been listening to the Goo Goo Dolls a lot recently for some reason, and I was just reading about them, how they were originally like just a real sort of rock band, and when they got big because they had one song that was alternative, and they really changed their entire sound.
Iris?
A lot of No, it was a song before that. Iris is
okay.
the biggest, but it was on their earlier album.
Yep.
But a lot of fans were like, "No, this isn't them. They're sold out. They've become mainstream." But that's actually what made them successful.
Yeah.
And now everyone's like, Iris is one of the best alternative rock songs of all time.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot in music, I think. Bands take a direction change. The only other thing, I guess, in terms of movies, like, it's not quite the same, but I know a lot of Oscar winners kind of have a weird thing. Like, Crash as a film that won Best Picture was originally loved and is now really hated and probably universally hated. I don't think it should be as hated as it is. And there was a movie called Ordinary People that won an Oscar in a year that was pretty filled with a lot of good films. And so people were like, "Oh, that actually shouldn't have won." But now people have come around the other way and said, "No, that was a great film."
Yeah. I think it's that whole thing. There's stuff that's ahead of its time, and there's stuff that's a product of its time that what doesn't hold up in the future, and stuff that will be held up better down the line. Grana, anything?
A few things came to mind I thought about for a bit, and then I realized like it wasn't the same thing. So I was thinking about some things that became cult hits. So like even like Firefly. Like, but I don't think that was because the show took a weird direction or anything like that, or like Joss Whedon went off his path from Buffy. It's just that it just never found its audience in its time. But the one that came to mind for me was a music one, which is Arctic Monkeys' album Tranquility Base Hotel Casino. It's a huge departure from their normal guitar rock sounds, and lots of people hated it. It grew on me, but I don't think it'll go down as like, oh, this was their best album ever.
Yeah. True. So thanks for that, our favorite listeners that love us. So last question before we wrap up. The Last of Us Part 3. Should it happen? What is it? And who should it follow? Like what's the perspective on this? Grana.
Well, when I first answered, like, nah, let it die. Let's do something new. But the more I think about it, I am keen to see what they would do with a number 3. Like the direction they've taken these characters so far, I would actually be really keen to see what they do next. Like obviously, number 2 was a huge departure from number 1. Yeah. Even just for the like even if it's a disaster, I'm keen to see that happen. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm just keen to see what they do with it.
Yeah. So would you stick with the same characters? Not like a
I mean you can't not have Ellie in the story again.
See, I could potentially see it just being Abby and Lev. Like I feel like Ellie has almost similar to 1, like this kind of ambiguity closure to like her journey, and now she's just off in the wilderness somewhere. But I'd be down for more Ellie, obviously, again, but I feel like they've set it up story-wise for an Abby and Lev story down the line, and to have that Joel and Ellie dynamic from the first game, and they're now in where is it? Forget where the boat ends up.
Yeah, what is it? Catalina Island.
Catalina Island, where the fireflies are, and
Are they though?
well, there could be some trickster, but yeah, I feel like they definitely get there because post credits the title screen changes from that boat to the boat on the land, which I'll just say that moment, because obviously the title screen is that boat just with the fog and just bobbing there in the water, and you get to that moment where you see them boats there as Ellie. I was like, oh, here we go. This is the climax finally that I thought we were at 12 hours ago. Conan, any thoughts on Last of Us 3?
Yeah, I don't know. I want there to be a third one. I don't know what they do with it though. Because this game really does feel like this is the end of it. It definitely doesn't feel like a bridging game in any way. It feels like they've been like they never wanted a trilogy. Like there's a sequel. So because I don't know. I feel like do they stick with it thematically and like do they kill Ellie off early on and make you be like, oh, I hate everyone, or do they?
They can't do that. They wouldn't do that. I don't
Wouldn't
think.
they? Wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Like you could follow Abby and Lev, but I don't know if there's enough with them to really be worth it. And you can't just kill Abby and be like Lev's now getting revenge because that's just the second game retrodden.
I definitely think you could do more stuff with Abby and Lev. Like, who knows what's on that island? Like, I think there's a lot more to add to Abby's. She's got to build that muscle back up.
It's true.
Somehow.
Her gameplay is just a training montage. Like, I think they definitely include her in any new game, but I can't see them entirely ditching Ellie. That just doesn't make any sense to me.
No, okay. Look, the first game's about love. The second game's about hate. What's the third one about? Is it love again? Do they just do that thing where trilogies... Gluttony.
Yep.
Well, Grant, unpack that. What's the last of this game look like?
A lustful workout montage. That's just complete. You know what? This is that like the album thing. Complete different direction from the Last of Us series up to this point.
Druckmann goes back. He's like, no, I heard the criticism. I'm giving you guys what you want. Abby's really feminine, and we're just going to show her being real sexy the whole time.
You know what? Just start of 3. They go back to that room. Joel cracks his neck, hops up. He's like, that was just a good rest. What's going on in this world? Tommy, where's your eye? What's going on?
What happened, buddy?
I'm back.
Luke, what's your...
And Abby's like, I need to return back to my homeworld.
Flies off the screen.
Yep.
Luke, what's your sequel, third one look like?
I want more because like I love these games and everything like that, but there's a part of me that doesn't want this story continued where I feel like you can't. I feel like, I don't know, it'll feel weird to have another game in this story with Abby and Lev and Ellie. Like, I feel like that's just more of number 2 again, and I feel like we've got the closure with them. I don't want to see them interact again. I don't want to see them sit around a campfire and talk about, have Ellie like realize that Abby's actually a cool person or whatever. Like, either have an Abby and Lev story, their adventures, or have Ellie be this like person finding herself. Because like she's still a young person. She's always been in this world. She's alone. She walks out. Does she return to Jacksonville? That's the thing. Does like at the end of that, do you think she goes back to Jacksonville to be with Dina, or is she out on the road again?
I don't know. My answer for the first game got betrayed by the sequel, so my answer for this will get betrayed by the third one.
Ellie's old and grizzled. She has to transport a young man across the land, and it's actually Dina's son.
Her son. Yeah.
And that reunites her with Dina.
Ooh. JJ.
That is actually that would be a very nice closure to the thematic cycle.
She's like, I don't want to look after no damn kid.
Well, like Ellie just goes away. She wanders and does what Joel did for those 20 years, and then Jacksonville gets like raided or something, and she finds only a handful of survivors, and he's one of them. That would be really cool.
Little JJ throws the insult like Ellie did about the watch being broken, and he's like, your fingers are missing. She's like,
she slaps him. Druckmann, if you're listening, we coined this idea.
Yep. Hire us, please. That'd be amazing. Any final thoughts on The Last of Us? Conan.
I love The Last of Us. The reason why I have a lot of criticisms about this game is because I can see how great this game is. And when you see the best example of something, you want it to just be the best. And so every slight problem with this, I'm more inclined to pick on. Doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that I'm like, you could be the best game ever made. You could be phenomenal.
Yep.
I did want to ask you guys about, do you think this form of, because this game is really cinematic. Do you think this is the direction that games should be leaning more into? Should they be more cinematic? Should they be focusing on telling these big stories? Or should they be leaning more into the mechanics of video gaming where, player choice is the biggest thing? Like, should that be the focus? Should you be including more elements like that?
My opinion is it doesn't have to be player choice, but I think gameplay needs to be as much a part of the whole package as the story, as the writing, as everything else. It seems dumb to me to be like, oh, video games are art and they have this whole other element to them where you get to play, you get to be in control, but then all the best examples are, well, this could be just a movie. Like, you could just watch this. The gameplay makes no difference. Whereas, for me, my favorite game of last year was Hades, and I think it does an excellent job of combining story and gameplay. Like, they both support each other really well. In a game genre that doesn't normally support that kind of interaction between story and gameplay. And the other thing I think is really interesting in games is emergent games, where things happen that no developer scripted this to happen. Like, Minecraft's probably a pretty good, easy example. Like, developers don't script certain things to happen in that game. The world's generated, and then these mechanics work together to create these events that then you want to tell other people about. You want to tell your friends about the time that, X, Y, and Z combined to create this crazy thing that happened. And I think that's an interesting way to look at video game stories. And I think a lot of games are taking advantage of that now. And that's where I think the interesting stories lie, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Luke?
My opinion, my favorite games are cinematic games. That's just what my thing is. Naughty Dog are the best in my opinion. My first gaming experience as a child was watching Metal Gear Solid 1 on the PS1, which, back then was this is like a movie. I love cinematic stuff. And obviously there's a place for, gameplay is king, a lot of people say. And there's a place for those games where, and I really enjoy that too. But my favorite games are cinematic storytelling games. And I think Naughty Dog are the masters of that. And especially just we didn't go over it in the pod, but the acting in this game, I feel, is on such a high level of quality. I think this game has the best acting in any video game I've ever seen.
Yeah.
The scene where Ellie finds the truth out from Joel and she just sits down holding her heart, it's heartbreaking, and you feel that. Joel, I feel like this is one of Troy Baker's best performances, and he doesn't do much, but it's so subtle. That porch scene is heartbreaking and brilliant, and it's just acting. It's just raw acting, and I feel like that's where this industry is growing as well. But there's always a place for gameplay, obviously, as well, because we're not just watching movies. And it'll be interesting to see once the HBO show for The Last of Us comes out, if what's better, The Last of Us show or The Last of Us game. So, yeah, Conan.
Yeah, I probably, there's a space for both of them. I do love cinematic games. Like I said, I adore these games, but I think I lean more to the side that Grana did. I think video games are a medium that have their own set of rules. They have mechanics, they have interactivity. And the same way that cinematic storytelling developed and became this standard of that's how you tell a story. That's only because it's how you tell a story on film. Novels have different rules, paintings, songs have different structure. There's a reason why most songs are 3 minutes, because, you could delve into the psychology of that, yada, yada, yada. I think video games do have a lot of inherent things that should be used better. And that's where the game medium sort of transcends into an art. We talked about it on the other pod, with Dark Souls utilizing the death mechanic. It's that's an inherent design thing of video games, and they use it in a really clever way. It's that's kind of that's a very simple example of where video games are using their medium to the right effect that games should, I think.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So thanks for watching. this we're doing this every fortnight. So we also have another podcast that we've been doing for several months now, The Good, the Bad, and the Worst, where we sit down and review and rank movie trilogies and discuss which one was the worst, why it was the worst, why The Mighty Ducks is one of the best trilogies of all time, why Back to the Future is overrated, yada, 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 all this sort of stuff. It's good fun. But thanks for watching as well. So you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram. We're at Good Bad Worst Pod for our other podcast, and at Bonus XP Podcast for this podcast. Like and subscribe. Smash that like button. Gently touch the subscribe button, as all YouTubers say. And I'll finish with a quote from our good friend T Bakes. If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again. We'll see you next time.
See ya.